New haircut, new recommendations. Let's do it. Welcome back to Archer's World of Literature, guys. Apologies again for once another silly intro. I just felt weirdly compelled to do it, and so I did. This is a video I've been wanting to do for a while, any sort of recommendation video. Specifically, this one I actually kind of somewhat high-key stole from Dakota Warren's channel. She's a channel that I really respect and admire quite a lot, and so I'm really hoping she doesn't mind that I going to this idea. So props to her. I'll link her channel in the description, and I'll link her latest classics recommendation video also in the channel description. But this is a video that is recommending classics for beginners, those who are looking to get into classic literature. Because most people with classics need, it's not really a gatekept sort of style of books, but you know, most people, including myself when I got started, need something a little bit smaller. They need some entryway books, because some of those big boys are really hard to grasp with. Some of the language is really hard to understand if you hadn't had like a little, you know, a build-up of a little taste testers and stuff. I put together this list, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it. So let's get through it. So first up on this list, I've got a little bit of a lesser-known one for most people. This is 1963 Yukio Mishima's, I'm going to have to read from the front because it's a long title. The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. Not a long title, but can be a bit of a tongue twister. But this is another Mishima masterpiece, and this is very, very short. So yeah, this is considered definitely a classic, a modern classic, because it's from the early 1960s. So the leader, one of the youth gang's sort of leaders, they're about 12 to 13. His mother starts having an affair, having a relationship with a sailor who pulls up into their town, this coastal town they live in. They end up falling in love through this. And at first, the boy, Noboru, really idolizes this man. He thinks that this guy is a real father figure for someone who lost his father. And he idolizes him as a sailor. I think it's been a while since I've read it, but Noboru wants to be a sailor himself, I think, if I recall correctly. We're off to a strong start, aren't we? And so for that reason, you know, he really admires this man and looks to him for advice, and follows him along and tags along. One night he ends up sort of finding this hole in his wall, and he peeks through, and he can actually see into his mother's room, and he sees his mother getting intimate with this sailor. And so slowly from then on, he starts to sort of end up despising this guy. And so he tells his little youth gang, his gang of friends, about this man, and about, you know, mostly how he thinks he's a pretty cool guy, and then how he slowly starts to despise this guy because he's sort of taking his mum away from him. And so him and his group of friends end up coming up with this devious plan to do something horrible to this sailor. And so that is sort of a basic premise, you know, as basic as I can go without spoilers, of The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. That's my first recommendation. It's short, it's Japanese, it's contemporary, it's gritty, it's dark, it's super brutal. I've said it many times before. Japanese literature, Japanese crime books can be super dark, and this is, I guess you'd call it a crime book, but again, it's just done so differently, different POVs, different ages of characters from traditional sort of Western crime books. It's not just a detective story. A lot of Western crime books are just detective stories and personal private detectives and stuff, and it can get really boring. It can just get too much. And the Japanese crime books are always so different, and it's super short, and it packs a really big punch. So I'm going to recommend this one as my first recommendation. So up next we have 1846, Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Double. Now this edition I've got here actually also contains his other work, Notes from Underground, but I'm going to be focusing on The Double from 1846. So the reason I recommend this one, and I highly recommend this to people who want to start getting into classics, personally, I find Dostoevsky's writing, for as old as it is, to be really easy to get into. It's not confusing. The translations for Russian literature hold up super, super well. And this is a book that has Dostoevsky's typical sort of tragic writing and tragic characters and characters that have a big downfall. But this is one of his most funny works. A lot of Dostoevsky stuff has some sort of ironically funny humor in it. And The Double is actually hilarious. So The Double follows this character called Mr. Golyadkin. And Mr. Golyadkin is just the typical Dostoevsky character who's just a hard-working dude who's sort of a bit fed up with life. And he ends up going to work one day, and the general premise of this book is that a new worker has started at his job, and a new worker has started at the job, and he looks exactly like Mr. Golyadkin himself. And it turns out his name is also Mr. Golyadkin. And what's funny is he starts sort of losing his mind because, he's like, oh, there's a doppelganger, this is my double, the double. And everyone at his job, everyone that he knows from down the street, all the people he would call, he doesn't have friends. Dostoevsky characters don't have friends, but sort of like all his acquaintances and people at work and his cleaner and stuff like that, they don't see the big deal. They don't realize, they sort of act as if, it's not his doppelganger, it's not someone taking over his life. And so this guy starts taking over his job, taking over his life, taking over his house, trying to become friends with him, manipulating him, and then the real Mr. Golyadkin starts just fully losing his mind. And it's just really funny because it's really tragic. This guy loses like a lot of things because of this doppelganger, but it's a doppelganger, right? It's really tragic when it comes to him losing all these things, but it's just really funny because no one else sees the big deal. No one else realizes, and everyone. So to him, it's almost as if like no one else sees that there's a second Mr. Golyadkin, and it's hilarious. I don't know. Something about Dostoevsky's writing is just like kind of funny sometimes. The way he comes up with it kind of remind me of like Greek plays and stuff, where it's sort of like a tragedy, but it's so wild that it's like kind of humorous because of like how blown out of proportion and silly they can be. But yeah, like I said, translation is super easy. I would always recommend Dostoevsky's book to anyone, but The Double is a really good one as it is a little bit shorter. Looks big here, but that's because there's two here, so The Double's probably only about half that. You can kind of blow through it in a couple of days to kind of get a feel for how Russian literature works and how it sort of ingrains itself in your mind and really makes you think about things like mental health and psychology. And it's just got some really, really great dialogue on life and death, but also adding some really funny scenes in there. So I'm going to recommend The Double by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, thirdly on my list, I have Albert Camus, The Outsider. I cannot stop talking about this guy on this channel. I know you guys probably want me to shut up about him, but he is just truly incredible. So this one is 1942, Camus, The Stranger. So The Stranger follows the character of Meursault, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing that, my French isn't that great, but Meursault is just this guy. I know I've just talked about lonely characters with Dostoevsky, but he is just this lonely guy who's kind of given up on enjoying life, and he sort of just does his day-to-day activities, and essentially his mum dies, right? So his mum died yesterday. The very first line is a very, very famous line in modern classic literature, and it is, "Maman died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know." And that is the line that has become infamous. And it's become infamous because people are trying to work out whether he really cares that his mum has died, or whether he truly does not. Because throughout the whole book, he sort of acts as if he doesn't care about anything. And that's why people think, and myself included, that this is a really big study on mental health and depression and stuff, because I think that, he's probably pretty depressed, and his mother dying has sort of accentuated that. Anyway, so he actually ends up just wandering around. He starts meeting some new friends, and a woman that he's interested in, and sort of he starts meeting these friends through her, and they end up going to this sort of beach holiday house. And his friends get caught up in this scuffle with some people, and then he bumps into these people again at the beach, and he decides to shoot them. And so the entire premise of the book, that's not a spoiler because that's like the main premise. Like if you read the back of the book, it's on there. And the rest of the book, sort of without going into too much spoilers, is him coming to terms with what he's done, and people who do end up finding out that he did that, trying to work out why. And the reader is constantly trying to work out why. Now, Camus' language, aside from his philosophy books, really easy to understand. Very, very, very good dialogue on the human condition and what drives a person to do something, and the sort of dark space and real despair that people have to do really terrible, terrible acts to other humans, like murder or assault or anything like that. Really, really great book. I would 100% recommend this. And I am going to recommend this. So if you want to get into classics, this is a really, really good one to start, particularly for modern classics. This one's pretty well known. This is another modern classic. We've got Mr. Jack Kerouac, On the Road. I have a review for this book on my channel. It was one of the first videos I posted, so it was a pretty special video for me. So go check that out if you haven't. It'll be somewhere. So, On the Road is considered one of the great American novels. It follows the characters Sal and Dean, and a handful of other characters that are supposed to reflect the real-life writers and members of the Beat Generation. So the Beat Generation was a collective of writers in sort of like the mid-1900s in America, and they wrote brutally and honestly about life in America and growing up, struggling, and then growing up into an adult that just gets into mischief and having fun and going to bars and just, kind of being terrible people, but living life to the full, I suppose. This follows the character Sal, who is sort of, he's from New York, and he's a pretty average kind of guy, and he ends up meeting this character called Dean, who's this very sporadic guy. And Dean is mad to live, so it says on the back here, the only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing. Dean is essentially that. Dean is just ready to go. He wants to find adventures constantly. And so Sal sort of ends up getting brought along with him and sort of getting into quite a bit of mischief with him. But Sal wants to sort of hitchhike across America for various reasons, and he's just visiting his friends, he's visiting Dean, he's visiting different girlfriends and other friends and, other writers and stuff, because Sal is loosely based, I believe, on Jack Kerouac himself. And he's just hitchhiking. The entire book is set on the road. He's hitchhiking from car to car, from truck to truck, bus to bus, state to state, border to border. They go to Mexico a couple of times and then they go back to America. It's just really, really, it's really a lot of fun. You really feel like, the good thing about this book, as why it's a good recommendation for an entry point, is that it really makes you feel like you're on the road with them. It flows so well. You really feel like you're going on a real journey, when really all it is just like a travel book, essentially. So I would recommend On the Road by Jack Kerouac. And I forgot to say at the start that this was first published in 1957. So this is another modern classic. Next up, here is my final modern classic recommendation. Now, I was struggling to contemplate whether to put this on because of its content. I also have a review for this on my channel. I believe it was my first review on the channel. A very difficult review to make and a very difficult book to read, but nonetheless incredible. And that is Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. If you know anything about this book, you know what I mean by hard content. Follows the perspective of a pedophile. And he is interested in younger girls, specifically Lolita, specifically Dolly, the daughter of his landlord, who ends up moving in with. So follows Humbert, Dr. Humbert, and the entire thing is from his perspective. And the way he's describing young women, young girls, is awful. It's disgusting how his mind works. But Nabokov was able to fully make, like, you just jump in his mind, and it's written so beautifully, right? That you really have to catch yourself sometimes, because you're like, oh, this is so beautiful the way it's written. And because it's written poetically. Anyone that's read it will tell you the content matter is disgusting, but the writing is so beautiful. And so you sort of find yourself thinking how beautiful it is, and then you snap out of it and you go, no, like, he's talking about that. Like, I can't be on his side here. But nonetheless, it is beautiful. So a lot of people wouldn't say that putting this on a list for, like, recommendations for classics would be a good idea, because a beginner might not be able to handle this sort of content. I put it on here because it is sort of, it is a controversial book, but it is super easy to read because of how beautiful the language is. It flows so easily. And I think that this would be a good entry point for classics, people who want to read classics, because a lot of classics do delve with some pretty dark themes. I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of classics deal with things like suicide, with murder, with young courtships, and a lot of things, because back in the day, they didn't have security cameras, they didn't have rules about who, consent laws and how old you had to be to marry someone, etc., etc. And so they were, not saying that they were written as if they were, more right, but people back in those days were sort of more used to that happening on a daily basis. So when you read something like this as a modern classic, it's sort of like, whoa, like, you're not allowed to write about that, you're not allowed to talk about that. And it is super hard to read. And it's sort of like I said in my review, I wish a book like this didn't have to be written, but it was actually based on a real case that happened. Nabokov wrote this book shortly after that happened, and so it sort of feels like he wrote that as a book to sort of put awareness on that case and awareness on this sort of issue. And for that, if that was his reason, I applaud him, because I feel like it made him get a lot of hate, and a lot of people, burned his books or threw them away or whatever, would never read this book and hated this book because of that. But either way, he put eyes on this as an issue, on child abuse as an issue. People might have become more aware of that being an issue in the society when this was released in the 50s or whatever. And I keep forgetting to say when these books have been released, I'm sorry. 1959. So I think it's a really great book, a challenging book for people to realize and form their own opinions about, be a little shocked, and realize that classics have a lot of confronting themes to deal with, that really help you improve your outlook on the world and how you can interpret what is wrong and right. So that is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. That is the last modern classic on this list. Now, on to these final 5. These are classics. This is, going to make sure you don't see it while I read when it's from. 1891, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde. This is one of the best classics of all time. And I put this on this list because it is actually really easy to read. Late 1890s, early 1890s, so language isn't super hard, super confusing. Picture of Dorian Gray is a staple of dark academia and a staple of the Irish literature, a staple of, classic literature in general. Picture of Dorian Gray follows a beautiful man named Dorian Gray, and he's the most beautiful looking man you could ever picture. And so much so that he ends up getting a famous painter to commission a painting of himself for him. And he ends up painting this picture, and it is so beautiful that people can't stop staring at this painting. And he ends up looking at it and thinking how beautiful it is, and he doesn't want to get caught up in it, so he puts it in his attic and he locks it away, and he doesn't want to look at it again. And then he notices slowly, day by day, that this painting starts becoming more and more disfigured. Starts having more of a frown, starts having eviler, yellower eyes, and the skin starts getting all paley and stuff. And he starts noticing that in real life, he's becoming a little bit of a dick, right? Realistically. He's very beautiful and he's very intelligent, but the trade-off is his personality sucks, right? And his personality is being reflected by the painting. And it is just the most incredible concept. And I put this one on here because it's short and it's easy to read. The themes are quite easy to grapple with as well. It's sort of just things on like the nature of beauty, and beauty versus personality. They're pretty easy enough concepts to understand. But I put this on this list mainly because this shows people the amount of fun you can have with classics. Like, what a crazy idea, right? Like a painting that reflects someone's bad personality when everything on the outside is perfect. Like, it's crazy. This was written in 1891, and something like that was being thought of. Like, no wonder these guys were so far ahead of its time, and people didn't like these sort of books when they came out because they were just ahead of their time. And now we look back on it, and they're long and gone, and we realize how amazing they are, and we should have treasured it when it came out. Like, these people were ahead of their time, I'm telling you. So, Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I know a lot of people have read it, but if you're a beginner, read it. Shows you that classics can be a lot of fun. This is 1909's Gaston Leroux, The Phantom of the Opera. Bang. Everyone knows it. It's a very famous play. a very famous movie, but it's actually based on a book, and this book is a masterpiece. So this follows the character Christine, and Christine is approached and sought out and sung to by the Angel of Music. And so she is a very famous singer at the Opera House in Paris, at the Paris Opera House. And she is in her dressing room one day and stuff, and she starts hearing these beautiful songs played to her, and this voice starts talking to her. And people are hearing about murders happening in the Opera House, and people are thinking that there's a ghost in the Opera House, right? And it turns out that the ghost is actually this Angel of Music. This ghost is someone creeping around, and he is the Phantom of the Opera. He is a phantom, he is a ghost, he is a man, he is immortal, he is mortal. We don't really know sort of until the end. I'm not going to go into it too much, but this is a Gothic icon, a Gothic literature icon. And when Christine is approached by a young Viscount, and she starts to kind of fall for him, and he's falling for her, turns out they had some childhood memories, and they used to not knew each other back then, and, you know, teen love and all that sort of stuff. The mysterious Phantom of the Opera gets jealous because the Phantom of the Opera has actually fallen in love with Christine. And so this is a dark romance, a dark Gothic romance between man, ghost, and woman. And it's filled with music, and it's filled with just horror and really scary stuff, and sort of illusions and magic and mysticism relating to a ghost, and people working out whether there's a murderer in the house, people arguing and sort of losing their sense of self and thinking they're going crazy because ghosts aren't real, right? Gaston Leroux makes you question that in The Phantom of the Opera. So I really think you can have a lot of fun with this as a really easy to read Gothic literature icon. So read The Phantom of the Opera. It's great, it's amazing, it's dark, it's fun, it's awesome. Next up, this is the biggest book on this list, and I put it on here because I think the language is easy. It's an epistolary novel, which is when it's sort of each chapter is sort of like news articles and diary entries and journals and letters and things like that from different POVs. And epistolary novels are so much fun. They feel like a real mystery. They feel like you're participating in a real murder mystery sort of thing. But this is... Sorry, 1890. Sorry, I just blanked there. I just completely blanked. This is 1897 Bram Stoker's Dracula. Right, everyone knows the classic story of Dracula. He's the vampire. He lives in Pennsylvania. This tells the original story, how this band of people gets together with Van Helsing. Van Helsing comes down from Amsterdam. He's a vampire hunter, and this town slowly starts getting corrupted by this Dracula who comes down from Pennsylvania to England across a boat. And you get this terrible news of murders, and it's just so much fun. It kind of becomes like this murder mystery because you're following these characters who sort of similar to Phantom of the Opera. They're trying to figure out what's going on. They're going crazy because, again, like Phantom of the Opera, with ghosts are not real, vampires aren't real, right? Well, we find out that that is not the case in Bram Stoker's Dracula. This actually made my top 10 favourite books of all time. I've made a video about that recently. I'll pop that somewhere as well. It's just absolutely incredible. It's terrifying. I put this on here as well because this is actually really, really, really scary. This is one of the first horror novels of all time, or one of the first great horror novels of all time. So had to put that on there. It is a big guy, but I would probably recommend getting into this after getting through maybe a few of the shorter ones that I've recommended before this one. But this is one of my favourite books of all time, and I think it can be a gateway book to classic literature because, you know, the suspense doesn't stop. It's super, super suspenseful, and I really don't think you can put it down. So definitely read Bram Stoker's Dracula when you're feeling up to it. Now, my second last book on this list is, everyone knows what this book is. This is 1818, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. I read this book in year 12 VCE, so I studied this for my final year of high school, and that was, that was 2019. It's a long time ago now, at least it feels so for me. I studied this in 2019, and I've got strong opinions on VCE English, but like a lot of books that you are made to read in school and overanalyze and stuff, you end up hating them. So when I read this, I hated it because I was forced to pick it apart and destroy it and overanalyze everything, and I just really don't like that method of reading. I like analyzing texts and finding the themes and stuff now, but as a growing teenager and stuff, it's like, I would have enjoyed this book if I could have just enjoyed it at my own pace and maybe written about things that I wanted to read about. And, I would have been fine with analysing it, but the over-analysing and the picking of everything, making sense out of things where it doesn't need making, like the colour of the grass or the sky, things like that, drove me nuts. So I don't remember having the best experience with this, but I bought this cloth-bound edition and I'm ready for a reread. I processed how good it really, really is. And this is definitely an entry book into classics. Frankenstein follows Frankenstein. This is essentially, like I said about Dracula, is one of the first sort of real horror novels. This, people actually think, is one of the first horror novels, but this is actually one of the first science fiction novels. If you look at any review on this book, people say that this book is science fiction. It's sci-fi horror, right? People think that this book's just horror because there's a monster. Frankenstein makes his monster, and it is. It's terrifying. It is horrific. It's Frankenstein goes grave robbing and like stitching different body parts together to try and make a human out of like different people's dead body parts. Like, it's grim as hell. It's brutal. But it's sci-fi because he's talking about using science. He's using like electricity, and he's using biology, and he's studying all these books and stuff. It's sci-fi. This is a really, really good book because there are a lot of good themes you can overanalyze in here, whether men should be tampering with the power of, greater beings and things and trying to create life, and meddling with science, or whether they should just leave it be, because when they do that, they can produce monsters. And that is essentially the general themes of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. She was really, really ahead of her time as well. Like I said, 1818, like to come up with something this brilliant, and an idea and a story this brilliant is crazy. It's incredible. And I recommend this as well because it's quite short. It's approaching 300 pages and there's just so much in here. And this is just one of the ones that I feel like if you want to get into classics, you have to get this one off your list for sure. Pick this one up next Halloween maybe. I know I said it's not horror, but it's like sci-fi horror. It's more sci-fi, but there's a monster in it, okay? Sci-fi horror. Read it at Halloween if you want an excuse to read it, to cross it off your list. It is definitely worth your while to do so. So that is my second last one to recommend for people that want to get into classics, Frankenstein. Now, this last one that I've got, everyone is going to know of this book. This is 1865, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. My lighting is hideous today. Wanted to show off these beautiful cloth-bound editions, but my lighting is just saying no. Everyone knows the story, right? Alice, she falls down a rabbit's hole, and it's just like this huge DMT trip. She ends up eating like magical muffins and stuff, and she starts seeing rabbits and talking cats and mad hatters and actual like playing cards, walking around and playing croquet. It's mental. It's absolutely bonkers. But this is a great entry to classics because it's a kid's book. It's very accessible. This is a book you can read to your kids. If you wanted to get into classics and you've got kids, read this to your kids and you can start understanding how fun classics can be. This has got illustrations in it. It's fun. It's absolutely mental. But this is a good one to get into because, like I said, this one's accessible. You don't have to have all that much brain power or energy or focus to really understand what's going on here. I actually read this... I read a lot of this during an all-nighter I pulled because I was finishing Oliver Twist and I was super, super tired. And I was reading this when I was just like zonked out of my brain from like zero sleep. And it was an even weirder experience doing that. And I feel like that kind of helps what Lewis Carroll was kind of doing. Because a lot of people think this guy was 100% on something when dealing with something when he was writing this, because it's just super, super wacky. Children's literature was always, I feel like, quite magical and things like that. So it does have that magical kind of crazy out of this world stuff because, kids' books aren't as easy to write as people think. You need to write with the intention of what's going to keep a child's attention span and imagination intact and following along with the story, because they can't read something that's like, super dull and has all these themes and stuff. So he just wrote something that has just some crazy illustrations and just constantly changing. It's just constantly got new wacky things going on. But yeah, I feel like this is a good one to put on this list because, yeah, like I said, it's kids' literature, so you could use this as an entryway to classics because it is a classic, but it's easy to follow along. It was made for kids, and there's nothing wrong with reading kids' books as an adult. I still read Diary of a Wimpy Kid and the original Harry Potters all the time. So check it out. I feel like this is another one that you probably should have marked off your list if you want to get through some of the major classics. I'm not going to put Through the Looking Glass on this one because Through the Looking Glass, in my opinion, was kind of where it went a little bit like too nuts. Like it was just like a real trip. The first one was like, you know, like a average trip, and then Through the Looking Glass was like where it just went like, kind of felt like Alice overdosed on Through the Looking Glass. So I would recommend just Alice's Adventures in Wonderland if you want something fun. So thanks for watching. I had a lot of fun making this list together. I think I'm going to enjoy doing recommendation videos in the future regarding certain topics, anything, any topics that you guys want me to recommend books for, any oddly specific recommendations. I love watching videos like that, and I actually had a lot of fun making a video like that. So if there's anything you want to see from me in regards to recommendations, or I can even give you some recommendations in the comments if you've got some really oddly specific ones. So I really enjoyed doing that, and I think I'll do some more in the future. Again, shout out to Dakota Warren, where I first saw this idea. Yeah, thank you. I love your videos. They're awesome, by the way. So yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. As I always like to say, keep reading and peace out.